Now, for the story of the red cowrie. There's lots of stories of red cowrie, but this is one of them. This is a legend from here on Big Island, from Kohala district, over on the northwest. Ikawakahiko, Mamualoa o Kapanekuke. Once upon a time, long before Captain Cook, a fisherman named Kainoa was walking down to one of the few real beaches on this island. He was walking toward his canoe. Now on the way, he stopped at a small ahu. In the old days, this was a kind of like a platform. It was an altar made of lava rock. And the ones they had on the beach were dedicated to the god of sea creatures, of all sea creatures, who was Ku'ula. So he put his hand on it and he said a prayer to Ku'ula. And he prayed for an abundant catch. Now, that part was typical, but usually he prayed for a catch of mullet, because that's what he really liked to fish for, because this was the one so beloved by the chiefs. But nothing had been happening very well lately. The fishing hadn't been good. There had, prosperity. His prosperity was going down. He and his wife were having troubles with, having enough to eat. So this time he said the prayer a little differently. He prayed for anything good the God was willing to provide, because it had been a long time since he'd caught enough fish to eat, much less trade, because these were also the days when most of the Hawaiians did barter. They would have some specialty that they would either have a skill or something that they would produce, and they would trade that for other things that they needed. Sometimes from the people higher up the mountain would trade down with the people on the shores. Sometimes districts would trade more horizontally, but most of it was barter. They did have what we could call a form of money, and that was tapa cloth. The women were constantly making tapa cloth, and so sometimes they'd store up the tapa cloth, and it really served the purpose of money, because it could be traded for anything, even from somebody who didn't want tapa cloth, because then they'd take it and store it and use it to trade for something else they wanted. Anyway, he was into barter, Kainoa. Now, this time when he made this particular prayer, he was very surprised, because he had his hand on the altar and it started to tingle, and that had never happened before. Now, he didn't know whether that was a good sign or a bad sign. But he then remembered a proverb. The proverb was, Rakanai'a ikamana'o hoi hoi. And that means fish are attracted by happy thoughts. So he decided that it was a good omen. Right? So now he started walking again toward his canoe, getting ready to go out into the bay. But not far from the canoe there was a shoreline reef. And normally he didn't do reef fishing, but today he just got this sudden impulse, this sudden idea, maybe he ought to walk the reef today rather than go out into the deeper ocean. So he reached in his canoe, he had a barbed fishing spear, and so he went over to the reef. Now the reef, reefs are rough, but he had very tough feet, so it hardly bothered him at all. And he started on the reef. It was full of tide pools. And so he's looking here and he's looking there and not really seeing anything. And suddenly a flash of movement out of the corner of his eye. And he wondered, is that an octopus? And so he quietly went over there and quietly got down low and looked through the water where the shadows were. And yes, it was. So he was very, very quiet. And then suddenly he struck with the spear and caught the octopus. Boy, he was very happy at that, because this was a very valuable prize. Okay? So he pulled it up and he bit it between the eyes until it went limp, put it up on a rock. Now, I know that sounds gross, but that's the way they did it. That's the way they still do it. But so he hung it up there on a rock and in a dry spot. And then he went back into the water this time and did the same thing and caught two more. Wow, he really felt lucky that day. Maybe the god was helping him. But anyway, he took them, and he took one of the octopus and he put it on the altar as an offering. Now you got to understand, Hawaiian offerings of this kind, they didn't put the stuff on the altar or to just rot away. Okay, it's not what they did. They knew that the gods only ate the spiritual essence, which sometimes was thought of as the aroma. And when he put that on the altar, he knew that the kahuna lava'i'a was the master fisherman, the one who taught and protected all the fishermen of that area. Why, he would take that as food. Okay, so he knew it wasn't going to go to waste. So he left it there on the altar. He went home, gave one to his wife to start preparing for eating, took the other one down to where the people gathered and used it for trade. And he got, some taro, and he got some sweet potatoes, and he got some bananas and chicken, because octopus was quite valuable. And so he went home, and he and his family had a feast. Because he was very, very happy with that. So now, next day he caught 4. Day after that he caught 4 more. And he was, wow, this is an incredible string of luck. And then he stopped to think, now wait a minute, he's a fisherman. What could be attracting the octopus to this particular spot? There's been a lot of other places and there weren't any. What attracted them here? So now he dove down. This was a deep tide pool. And so he dove down deep in there and looked around, and finally he saw a red cowrie, very rare, in a crack in the rock. And the octopus, so far, they had not been able to detach it from the rock, because the cowries cling very strongly when they want to. Most of the time, what the octopus do is they'll clamp down on the rock, and then they'll with their beak, they'll drive a hole through the shell, and then they'll suck out the cowrie from that. Cowrie is sort of snail-like, so that you have some kind of an idea. So anyway, that's what they would normally do, but in this case, it was wedged in a crack, and although the red cowrie was they loved cowrie, that was their favorite meal, octopus. And the red one was the most favorite, but they couldn't get it out. But Kainoa could, because he had a stone knife, and so he was able to detach it from the rock and pull it out, and now he was extremely happy, because now he could use this as a lure and catch as many octopus as he wanted to. Here I'm going to do a little bit of parentheses and give you some information. Okay. It says that the cowrie was red. In these waters in Polynesia, there really isn't any cowrie that's red as we would think of red. Right? So there's a lot of tales of red cowries, so what's going on? Most of the time, if you're reading this story, if it's been written, why it says that the cowrie was either a bright red or a dark red, because these are the two of the meanings of the word, the sacred word for red, which is ula. And so they just, kind of copy that and say it was a red cowrie. However, when we start to learn a little bit more, ula can mean the red of blood, but it can also mean brown, like the brown of a horse, or it can mean the brown of the skin, the Hawaiian skin. Okay, so what happened was the Hawaiians, like many other indigenous peoples around the world, didn't give a lot of words for colors. They didn't make up a lot of words for colors. Colors weren't all that important, not like us. We've got computers on our desks with millions of colors, each one with its own separate name. The Hawaiians had lots and lots of names for things that were important to them. Stars for navigation, hundreds of names for wind, different names for water and fish as they grew to certain stages. So, they had lots of names for the things that were important, but colors weren't, not such a big deal. So the word ula was often used to mean orange. The word that's used for orange today is alani, but that's taken from English. It's just a Hawaiian way of saying orange. There's a rain on Maui that's famous for. It's called ulalena. And this means kind of reddish yellow, with more on the yellow side. Actually, although that's famous in Maui, yesterday morning in Kapoho, I saw this rain. I got up shortly after sunrise, was totally overcast of the whole sky, and everything, even the houses, everything was orange. There was this orange light, and it was raining. Okay? Amazing. So now I have a personal understanding of what that ulalena means. Couldn't figure it out before. So anyway, we have this ula. Now, here's where we're getting to the point. When gold coins were first introduced into Hawaii, the word for money at the time was a word from English, dollar, and so the Hawaiians called it kala. And kalaula, or kalaulaula, is what they called gold coins. And yet they were gold. So now, and I have to say at this point that this is a theory, but it's my theory that most probably the red cowrie, or the leho ula, was probably the pretty rare golden cowrie. And that would make a lot of sense from in point of view of the language. And it is rare. And they are here in Hawaii. I found one on the Nepali coast of Kauai. I have it in my collection. So it all kind of fits together, but that's theory, I admit. Okay, now back to the story. So here's Kainoa with the red cowrie, and he's trying to use it as a lure to catch the fish, catch the octopus. So he tries different kinds of ways, you know. Sometimes he just tried tying it to a string, and then the octopus would slip off it when it felt being tugged. And finally, after a lot of experimenting, he came up with something that is still used by fishermen today. It was a little post. I wish I had one to show you, but think of a little post. At the bottom is a bone hook. At the bottom of that is to help to hide it is a little frizzy part of the coconut husk. Okay. Up higher, tied very tightly, is a cowrie on one side and a lava rock roughly shaped like a cowrie on the other side to give it weight. And so this would be dropped down into the water, and when the octopus went for the cowrie, why, the fisherman would jerk it up and entangle the octopus on the hook and then pull it up and bite it between the eyes and all the rest of that. So that's how the octopus were caught in deeper waters and to catch more of them. All right? So that's what Kainoa finally, so he was sort of like the inventor of this way of octopus fishing. Now, he caught plenty of octopus for feasting, and he would invite friends, and for trading, and he became, in the Hawaiian terms, a wealthy and important man in the whole area that he was living in. However, because of that, word of him and his famous lucky cowrie went off around further and further, and finally other chiefs had heard about it, but finally it reached a chief living over down in Kona. We're talking about Big Island. We've got Kohala up here, and then down the coast is Kona. And so there was a chief of Kona, but this particular chief, rather than being happy that somebody in his district was successful, why, he was kind of selfish. He was kind of ruthless. And so when he heard about this wonderful lucky cowrie, he sent one of his servants to steal it whenever Kainoa had gone to bed and had stored it wherever he stored his gear. He sent this servant down to steal it. Well, about a week later, the servant came back and said, can't do that. He always keeps it with him. He either keeps it in his malo, that's something like a loincloth, or he's always holding it in his hand. So, can't steal it from his stores. So the chief thought about this for a while, and then he called another one of his servants, a really sneaky guy. And he sent this guy down to make friends with Kainoa, to work for him, and to become such good friends so that Kainoa began to trust him. And then as soon as he had the opportunity, he was supposed to steal the cowrie. Well, that's how it worked out. The guy went down there, very nice, he could, very friendly, very open, like con men today, and made friends with Kainoa, went to work for him. Kainoa began to trust him like a brother, and one time when Kainoa had to go and prepare some of the octopus for trading, he handed his cowrie to this guy to hold for him until he came back, and when he came back, the guy was gone. And so, of course, he's upset. Upset because somebody he thought was a friend did that, and upset because the cowrie's gone. So he goes to the kahuna Lavaia, the fisherman kahuna, and he asks him for help. And here's one of the kinds of help that this kahuna was able to give. He has a bowl, and in this bowl of water, he put a polished piece of basalt, so polished it was like a mirror. And he'd put that inside the bowl. And then he'd gaze in that to see a vision of something that he was focused on. It was a Hawaiian-style crystal ball. Okay? So he looked into that, and then finally he looked up and he said, "It's the chief of Kona who has your cowrie." And Kainoa says, "What am I going to do? I can't call the chief a thief." He says, "I'd be dead in an instant." And the kahuna smiled and he said, "Yes, that's true," he said, "but you can always steal it back." He said, "I know a young man, he's a young trickster shaman, lives in the hills behind Hualalai volcano. He's young, but he's really good. And if you go and you treat him like a man, maybe he'll help you out." So Kainoa did this, and he went south toward Kona. He went Mauka, which is inland, and he went over, and he found, his name was Eva. So he found Eva sitting under a tree and juggling these little balls of lava rock, and he'd make them appear and he'd make them disappear, and he was really good. So Kainoa greeted him and asked him if he could do this favor for him. Now Eva was very happy, very flattered, because here was an adult asking him to do a favor, so he agreed. So Eva went, he said he'd get his cowrie back. So Kainoa went home. Eva went down to the coast, down to where the area of the chief was. And he found the chief's daughters sitting on the sand. So he went down there and started chatting them up, is the way they say it today. And he would tell funny stories, and he'd do string figure slip tricks, and he amused them tremendously. And so finally, in the course of that, he'd say something, get them to say something, and he finally found out where the chief went fishing. So then he said goodbye, and he went and he found an old fisherman, and who had a canoe, and he talked the fisherman into taking him out because he was going to fish for some kind of fish. And he guided the fisherman to go out until he was in the general area where the chief was. So he could see the chief's canoe, but he didn't dare get too close. So he put down his line, his regular fishing line, and he's sitting there and he's fishing with the old man. And finally, he acts like his hook is caught. He says, "My hook is caught on a rock, I have to go get it." He says, "Just hold the canoe right here." So Eva dives in, dives way down. He could hold his breath for a long time. Dove over to where the chief's cowrie was hanging down. Very carefully replaced the red cowrie with an ordinary cowrie. And then swam back, came up, and told the old man, "Oh, I'm too hungry to keep fishing, so let's go into shore." So he did that. The old man brought him back in. He gave the old man a gift of some nice bone fish hooks, for what he had done for his work. And Eva went back all the way up to Kohala, met Kainoa, gave him his cowrie back. Kainoa gave him anything that he wanted. We don't know what he wanted, but he had it, whatever it was. And so Kainoa was very happy. He had his lucky cowrie again, and Eva was very happy and went on to have many, many more wonderful adventures. Pipiholo ke ka'au. And so goes the story. Okay? So, This is actually a story about prosperity. And so we're going to talk now about some ways in which you can do things that will help increase your prosperity. Now, I could give you a month-long workshop, a 2-week workshop, a week-long workshop. So I'm just going to give you some guidelines that maybe you can take with you, because they'll work, these guidelines. They're good things. And the first one is, you have to know what prosperity means for you. Because it's going to make a difference as to what you do and what you can do. So is prosperity just being able to pay the bills? Is prosperity being able to pay the bills and have some left over? Is it not only having some left over, but some to share? Right now, I want to tell you there's no right answer to this, okay? It's not like one of these things is better than the other. Some people might think so, but what matters is what you think. Sometimes people want so much money they don't know what to do with it, okay? And so we see a lot of instances of that in the world today. If they don't know what to do with it, well, you can always go and pay $20 million for a piece of painting that somebody made. That kind of thing is done too. But that's one type of prosperity. Okay? So whatever it is that you have in mind, it's good to have something in mind. Now later on, you can change your mind. Don't ever be afraid of doing that. But starting off, it's good to know what kind of prosperity you want. Okay, or what is prosperity for you? So now, if you'll notice what Kainoa did right at the beginning, when he wasn't prosperous, when he made his prayer to Ku'ula, he was willing to change what he was doing and how he was doing it. And that's important. Because whatever prosperity you have right now is the result of whatever you're doing right now. However you're thinking, however you're behaving, in whatever way you are either earning what you need or creating whatever abundance you have or non-abundance, you got to be willing to change. Because you can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. Okay? You got to do something different. Now, it doesn't have to be so different that it's an entirely new kind of work, although you got to be open to that too. But it can also be doing what you're doing differently. But being willing to make a change is very, very important. Okay? Now, the next thing is being able to keep your focus on what you want and not on what you don't want. An awful lot of people, even if they don't have what they want and they want to do and make a change about certain things, they're very impatient. And it's kind of funny, you know, because people will spend years learning a particular type of trade, learning a skill, building up experience, but then when they want to change and increase what they have, they give up after 2 or 3 tries or 1. And that's never going to work. Okay? Or they'll start immediately, it didn't work the first time, so they start worrying, or they start thinking about this isn't going to work, or they start thinking in negative terms, or I can't do this, or that's a good way to go back worse than where you were to start with. Okay? So you got to keep that focus on what it is you want and not put all your thinking on what you don't want. If you start thinking about what you don't want, shift over back to what you do want as fast as you can. Because then you're going to start getting ideas and inspirations, and God is going to help you when you keep your focus. But if you keep blocking that help by thinking negative, it isn't going to get you anywhere. So keeping your focus on what you want, okay? That doesn't mean a hard, stiff focus. It just means keeping it in awareness, what you're doing and why you're doing it. Part of my prosperity program includes taking a break at the end of the day and watching television. Right? that relaxes me. That refreshes my body, refreshes my mind. And sometimes I get good ideas from the television for the kind of things I do. And so that's part of the process of keeping my focus. Because I'm not doing it to escape. I'm not doing it because I can't stand my work anymore. I'm doing it to prepare myself for the next day and for the new things I want to do. It's all in how you focus. Okay. Now another thing kind of going along with that is you do what you can do when it's time to do it. In the story, Kainoa got an inspiration. He didn't go back and sit in his canoe and think about it. He didn't go home and said, I think I'll ask the wife and wonder about this. He didn't go looking for someone else to tell him it was okay. He got an idea about going and fishing on the reef, and so he grabbed his spear and went fishing on the reef. Because that's where he was, and that was the thing to do. When you're doing whatever it is you're doing, in whatever way you want to do it to increase your prosperity, you just have to do what is there to do. Planning is wonderful. But planning is a fantasy unless you do something to carry out the plan. It's amazing how many people forget that part. Okay? And so that's part of it too. Being in the present moment, acting in the present moment. Okay? For the things of the present moment. Now there's another thing too. Kainoa did this in the story, but it's something that's also important to remember. And a lot of people don't remember it. But this is good for you as well as being good for other people. In whatever you do, in whatever you're doing, if you can think of it in terms of providing a service for someone, you're going to be able to go a lot farther with it and not only help others, but enjoy helping others a lot more. And it doesn't matter what kind of work you're doing. You could be doing farming. You could be doing fishing. You could be doing stock market. When you're doing it with this idea, this is an aloha concept, when you're doing it with this idea of doing it as a service for someone, then you automatically start thinking about ways to improve the service, ways to do it better, ways to make people happier, because happy people are the ones giving you money for whatever it is you're doing. Some kinds of trades you don't ever see the people, but you're still going to have to do something to please somebody. When you're a writer, like this is mostly what I do, you usually don't see the readers. And you're lucky you hear from some of them, but you're going to have to please the publisher, you're going to have to please the editor, you're going to have to please the readers at some point. It's fun to write a story only for yourself. It doesn't usually make you very much money, if that's what you need. So you got to think in terms more, if you think in more in terms of service, not you have to, but if you do, you're going to find you're going to enjoy it more, you're going to do better, more people are going to enjoy what you have to offer. Now there's another part here. You trust yourself. Now this was kind of dramatically brought out in the story, and I'll show you how it applies in our modern world. So Kainoa trusted this guy so much that he gave him his cowrie, which is the source of all his income. Right? What's the equivalent today? The equivalent today is that when we start to begin earning some money, we'll talk about it in terms of money right now. When we start to be earning some money, we turn it all over to our accountant. We don't want to touch the dirty stuff. We don't want to look at those numbers. That's the best way to lose it. Because sometimes, the accountant is a human being. And sometimes they just get tempted beyond what they're able to stand, especially if they know you're not going to look at the books. Okay? It's very important to become friendly with money and friendly with numbers. You don't have to be an expert, but friendly enough so that it doesn't turn you off to look and see what's happening to your income, to look at your bank statements, to look at your credit cards things without, and making sure that they're for things you actually bought. Okay? To become involved in the income. That's a very, very important thing. Lots of famous people have lost everything. A friend of ours lost a big hotel that they had next to Diamond Head because they just wanted all of the fun and to be able to spend the money, and they didn't want to look at any figures or numbers. And it took some years before the accountant, he was also the manager of the hotel, because they just turned everything over him. You do it and just give us the money back. And one day they went down to talk to the manager, and he wasn't there. And neither was their money anywhere, because they turned it all over to him. Okay? Not smart. Even if you're not talking in terms of hotels, even if you're talking just about your own checkbook or your own tax, you hardly have any taxes to pay, it doesn't matter. Look at it. It's good for you. Okay? To be aware of where you're at in that part of your life. It's a part of your life. Because you have to be willing to do the stuff that's not so much fun in any kind of prosperity. And sometimes writing things down, and sometimes checking numbers, and sometimes filling out the check register, and sometimes looking at your bank account statement. Not always a lot of fun, but it's part of the process. If you want prosperity, okay. If you don't, no problem. But if you do, then that's part of the process. Those things that are not so much fun, and you've got to make them, how can I put it, important enough to do, but not so important that you feel bad about them. That's a little skill. And that brings us to the last part here, which is, okay, part of the process here is keep learning more and more, not only about what you do and what your particular source of income is, but the more things you become aware of, the more things that you learn, the more skills you develop. This does wonders for your brain, and it does wonders for your intuition, because ideas start coming in through these channels of learning and skills that you make up. Okay? And you start to get all kinds of great ideas and make connections that you hadn't thought of before. And you see things, I mean actually, literally see things in your environment and in your work that you might not have seen before. Because now you've got new knowledge, you've got new awareness, you've got new skills stimulating you. Okay? That's an important part of the process too. So there's some general guidelines that if you apply them in your own way, they're going to help you a great deal to increase your prosperity. Okay. Do I have any questions or comments? Okay, and then, well, I'm going to give you a little time to think about that, because we'll have some time for some more questions. Right now, we were looking for this. See now, I was too focused. I was so focused on giving you this story that I almost forgot the blessing, and I did forget what I was looking for and didn't even see it. This is what I wanted to show you. Okay? This is what it looks like. It hangs by the line like this. And see, there's the hook, and there's the cowrie shell, and there's the rock. And that's what they use. Okay.